Hello, everyone. We're going to give everyone just a few minutes to get logged in before we get started. All right. Welcome to Animal Welfare in Focus, Navigating Trends, Challenges, and Collaborative Solutions. Just a few housekeeping items. Our focus today is a conversation with our presenters. Think about a podcast style with a little more depth. Therefore, we don't really have any content that we're going to be sharing with you other than our introductions. We won't really have any slides that we're going to share with you. So on the On24 console, you have the ability to move or resize the speaker view and the slide area. To remove the slide area, use the icon at the bottom of your screens. And as we move through this conversation, feel free to drop in questions into the the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen for our presenters to answer. We will have some time at the end of the questions that we have for you to address some of the items that you put in the Q&A widget for us. You will find that as we go through this, we're going to dive directly into the subject of animal welfare organizations and cover the similarities and the differences between shelters and sanctuaries missions and needs, unique funding challenges for different animal care settings, create solutions, collaborations, and real-world tips for our operational support. A little bit about your part-time controller, or YPTC for short. YPTC is a professional services firm that specializes in nonprofit financial management for over 3 decades. With the goal of helping our clients sleep at night, our services include day-to-day accounting, financial reporting, and data visualization, just to name a few. We serve over 2,000 clients from 13 regional offices and remotely throughout the United States and other countries. Additionally, we have an animal welfare specialization or vertical group that provides extra resources and tools for our animal welfare organizations. My name is Aimee Pourciau, and I am the director of our Denver office of YPTC. In addition, I have the distinct pleasure of serving as our animal welfare vertical leader. I have with me 2 of my lovely colleagues, Stephanie Cooperman and Jennifer Dombek. I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself. Could each of you introduce yourselves and share about your past experiences working with animal shelters or sanctuaries and where that work took place?
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Cooperman. I'm an associate in the New York market, and I've been with YPTC for about a year and a half. I have 13 years of experience in a variety of accounting and finance roles, ranging from audit to financial planning and analysis, and nonprofit financial management at an animal sanctuary for farmed animals in upstate New York.
My name is Jennifer Dombek. I am a manager in the Denver market of YPTC. I joined YPTC about 2 years ago, and prior to coming to YPTC, I was a director of finance for a local humane society here in the Denver metro area, and I was there for about 11 years.
Thank you for sharing your history. How about sharing what drew you to YPTC, and how do you see your background adding value to our vertical and our work with our animal welfare organizations?
I was specifically interested in YPTC because of the focus on working with nonprofit organizations. And having spent a significant amount of time working for the Humane Society, I've gained a lot of insight into the many details that shelters need to address from the financial standpoint. So my hope is that some of that experience will be beneficial to others who are now responsible for the finances of animal welfare organizations.
I was drawn to YPTC for similar reasons. I enjoy working with nonprofits and was excited about the opportunity to share my professional experience with a variety of organizations. Just as Jennifer described her experience working with the shelter, My experience working as the finance manager at a sanctuary gave me a lot of insight into the day-to-day operational successes and challenges and how those operations impact the overall financial success of the organization.
So now that we have those introductions out of the way and we only have a limited amount of time, let's dive right in. From your experience, what are some core similarities in the missions and the day-to-day operations of shelters and sanctuaries?
There are a lot of overlaps. Both aim to provide safety, care, and better outcomes for the animals in their care. Animals can come to both shelters and sanctuaries injured or sick. Both shelters and sanctuaries assess incoming animals, provide any needed medical care, whether it's for an injury or a sickness or just regular vaccinations. They both aim to educate people about the animals in their care and advocate and raise awareness for those animals. Shelters and sanctuaries both rely heavily on donations, monetary donations, in-kind donations, and donated time. They really depend on their volunteers.
So Jennifer, you just mentioned working with volunteers. How do both types of organizations rely on community engagement and volunteerism? And what best practices have you seen for fostering this type of support?
As anyone who has worked in animal welfare knows, it's extremely expensive to house, care for, and feed animals. Utilizing volunteers to perform routine tasks can save a significant amount of money in salary expenses. And those dollars saved in salaries can then be redirected to animal food, supplies, medical care. While both sanctuaries and shelters utilize volunteers, the tasks performed by the volunteers can be very different. Stephanie, what types of tasks are performed by volunteers at a sanctuary?
So volunteers can be helpful in a lot of ways. Often volunteers can be helpful within animal care itself. For example, cleaning enclosures, distributing food, replacing bedding. But volunteers can also help with the less obvious tasks, such as administrative work, fundraising phone calls, event planning, staffing events. If the sanctuary provides tours to the public, that's something they can be trained on. Regardless of the type of volunteering, it's absolutely important to build strong relationships with volunteers, providing consistent opportunities, showing gratitude, maybe a little extra fun time with animals, not revolving around work, providing discounts for merchandise or even free membership, if that's something that's offered, are also really great incentives. Jennifer, can you talk about some of the ways volunteers are utilized in shelters?
Yes, all of the volunteer duties you just mentioned also occur in shelters: feeding animals, cleaning kennels, assisting with admin work, assisting with events and fundraising. One volunteer opportunity that is typical in animal shelters that you don't see in sanctuaries is fostering animals. Since the majority of the animals who are in shelters are cats and dogs, volunteers of a shelter can foster those animals in their homes. For a dog, this can save over an hour a day in staff time just from the one task of walking a dog 2 to 3 times a day, not to even mention the time it takes to clean a kennel and feed the animals. The dollar value of 1 hour of volunteer time today is approximately $31. So having dogs and cats in foster homes, in addition to relieving that huge burden on the shelter from a staffing perspective, can also save the organization a lot of money. Typically, in foster situations, the shelter pays for the animals' food, medications, and veterinary care. And I was just reading a statistic about a week ago that more people would foster animals if they were aware of it not being a financial commitment. So it's important for the shelter to be clear about what their expectations are of their foster families. If it's only a time commitment, make sure that's clear and that your volunteers understand it is not also a financial commitment.
I'd like to go back to a point that you mentioned, Stephanie, building strong relationships. These relationships are vital to keep your volunteers engaged with your organization. I've seen organizations do alumni groups or Christmas cards or holiday cards to their volunteers to keep them engaged throughout the year. and to help them remember why they wanted to volunteer in that first place. So, we've talked about the similarities between shelters and sanctuaries, but let's dive into their differences. When you think about how these organizations vary, especially in terms of their animal care and their financial aspects, what challenges come to mind? I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, a major difference when it comes to sanctuaries is that when an animal is taken in, the sanctuary is most likely making a lifetime care commitment. Therefore, there's a really great need for long-term financial planning and resource planning to provide ongoing basic needs like housing and medical care, but also for enrichment care. Another difference between shelters and sanctuaries is that the sanctuary staff typically need to have expertise in caring for specific species that are just less commonly studied. So, for example, at a farm animal sanctuary, staff need to know how to interact with large animals like cows or maybe donkeys. Horse sanctuaries obviously need to have people that specialize in horse care and so on. Regarding financial sustainability, sanctuaries rely heavily on donors and sponsorships, as there are no adoption fees to offset the cost of rescue. And finally, sanctuaries often have a very broad mission to educate the public and advocate sometimes for systemic change. So, for example, like wildlife exploitation or ending factory farming. So sometimes balancing the educational outreach with operational demands can be challenging for the organization. Jennifer, what challenges come to mind related to the animals that are cared for in shelters and their financial implications?
One difference and something that can be very challenging is the number of animals that are being cared for in a shelter setting. Unlike a sanctuary, when an animal arrives at a shelter, the hope is the animal will be adopted quickly, hopefully within a few weeks or months. When animals do arrive, their health and behavior are assessed. They are given any needed vaccinations, they're spayed or neutered if that's needed, and then they're ready to go up for adoption. So there is kind of an inventory management. The shelter typically doesn't know when an animal is going to arrive. So at the beginning of the day, they don't know how many animals might be surrendered or how many strays may come in. They also don't know if any of the incoming animals are going to have any medical conditions that must be addressed. And then they don't know how long it will take for an animal to be adopted out. In recent years, there has been a trend in shelters where they are often at or over capacity, which brings up a very important point. It's very beneficial for both the pet owners and the shelters to focus on keeping an animal in the home, and that's obviously very good for the animal. It's important to understand why a person is giving up an animal. It's often about cost, and that might be something the shelter can help with. Another difference between animal shelters and sanctuaries is that shelters rely on donations, adoption fees, veterinary fees. If they have a vet clinic that's open to the public, they typically have grants and municipal funding. This revenue diversification is great. It really helps if one source of revenue drops off to have other sources of revenue to rely on. But when funds are coming in from many different sources, there is more of an accounting need. There's more accounting that needs to be done, and it can become more complex. So the donations are typically coming in from various places. Adoption fees have to be tracked. There's financial reporting needed on grants and billings to municipalities based on the contracts in place.
Those differences seem to suggest that both types of organizations may need to raise funding. Can you share some examples of collaborations between shelters, sanctuaries, or other organizations that have worked well in easing some of these challenges?
A really interesting and successful fundraiser that I've seen lately was a bracket fundraiser. So in this fundraiser, one organization served as the lead organizer and invited numerous animal welfare organizations to work together to raise money. It was set up just like a March Madness bracket where several sanctuaries competed for most dollars raised, and the winners of each round would move on to the next stage until there was an ultimate winner. It provided a really fun opportunity for friendly competition and for people to also learn about and support other animal welfare organizations that they weren't previously familiar with. In addition, other than annual appeals and fundraisers, there are a lot of ways that sanctuaries can raise funding. They can provide tours, which can be both on-site or virtual, and hold events at the sanctuary. Sanctuaries can provide donors with the opportunity to sponsor specific animals. In return, the sponsor can visit with their animal, receive periodic updates. This provides a more meaningful connection between the donor and the organization, which while also providing a recurring revenue stream.
I love the bracket fundraiser idea. It's great to see animal welfare organizations working together and having it benefit both organizations. When those organizations collaborate, they gain a wider audience for the animal welfare causes and a wider audience for each of the individual organizations.
Yep, absolutely. Another really great tool that can be used is an Amazon wish list. Often donors like to know exactly where their dollars are going and therefore would prefer to buy items for the organization rather than providing dollars directly. Amazon wish lists can include anything from feed bowls to over-the-counter medications, cleaning supplies. When the item arrives at your location from an Amazon wish list, it comes with a note and includes the person's name that purchased it, so you can be sure to send a thank you. This is actually considered in-kind revenue for your organization, so it would be counted as revenue on your income statement. Two additional revenue sources I'd like to mention are bequests and endowments. Both of these funding sources can sometimes be overlooked because they require long-term planning strategies and require some heavy lifting in the early years rather than providing immediate funding. However, setting up the relationships and opportunities for dedicated donors to provide this type of funding can really set organizations up for long-term success. These can be tricky accounting topics as well, and YPTC can absolutely help with setting up the proper accounting treatment and help form policies around the use of the income that come from these sources.
Animal shelters also use wish lists such as Amazon and Chewy wish lists. They are such an easy way to get the items the organization needs. It's amazing how many boxes of dog bones a shelter will go through. When it's kitten season, there are very specific supplies needed for the really young kittens. Cleaning supplies are always needed. These wish lists allow for the organization to get exactly what they need, and it's so easy for the donor. Many shelters also hold an annual large gala. Those events typically have catered food and drinks. They often have some sort of educational program, a silent auction, or a live auction. Stephanie mentioned in-kind donations. Remember to ask the vendors if they can donate the food or drinks or some portion of the food and drinks needed for the event. And also don't forget third-party fundraisers. Third-party fundraisers are when a local business, oftentimes a restaurant, chooses to donate a certain percentage of revenue on a specified day to the nonprofit organization. This is an easy way for the shelter or the sanctuary to generate revenue without committing a lot of staff or volunteer time to the fundraiser. Pet photos can also be a really fun fundraiser for the shelter. Pet owners can get photos of their pets in a Halloween costume. Photos can also be taken of the pets for holiday cards. Pet owners love photos of their pets. Pet-friendly festivals are another fundraising event that is common for animal shelters. Vendors that sell specialty pet food or other pet products may purchase a space at the festival so they can sell those products. There are often 5K runs or walks that take place in conjunction with the festival. I've seen in the fall, if the festival is held in the fall, there might be like a chili cook-off competition with that. Local businesses often sponsor events for the shelters, especially the larger events like the annual galas, pet festivals, and the 5K runs or walks. These events allow the community to be involved with the shelter and learn more about the organization. Being involved in the events at the nonprofit can really help people have a connection with the organization.
One other thing that I would like to point out, which we won't have much time to discuss in detail, is the opportunity to partner with your local human shelters to seek grants that provide a shared funding for both humans and their pets. And this can either be state, local, or even federal funding. And we'll have more on this in an upcoming webinar. We've covered, now that we've covered some revenue sources for both sanctuaries and shelters, how do you see the differences between the two impact your expenses?
So as I spoke about earlier, when an animal comes to a sanctuary, the animals usually stay there for the duration of their life, since sanctuaries are typically not for companion animals. Although sanctuaries tend to have fewer animal rescues than shelters overall, their care tends to be more expensive in the long run due to the length of time they are under the care of the sanctuary. It's beneficial to implement some cost control measures in these areas, for example, negotiating bulk discounts for feed and medical supplies, or even partnering with vet schools for reduced cost services. Some metrics that I've always found helpful to track over time are lifetime cost of an animal, which of course changes depending on the average lifespan of that animal, the cost per species, annual rescue expenses versus the ongoing care expenses. Tracking metrics like this over time can help identify if certain expense areas are drastically changing and if budgetary accommodations need to be made. I'd also recommend doing consistent expense reviews to determine if any dollars are being spent unnecessarily. A surprise savings that I've always found is within insurance policies. Are you paying workers' compensation insurance for people that are no longer with your organization? Are you paying for liability insurance on structures that no longer exist? Whatever type of insurance policies you have, it's definitely worth time to meet with your provider to review the details of the policy. Another major difference is the expense of land. So more land is generally needed for a sanctuary, as animals either tend to be much larger or they need specific habitats and environments. So this includes the cost of the land itself, plus maintenance and care of the land. Additionally, newly rescued animals may have to be quarantined for a period of time until they are tested for diseases. So additional space is also needed for quarantine areas.
I'll point out a few differences between the sanctuary setting and the shelter setting. When an animal arrives at an animal shelter, the hope is that the animal will be adopted quickly within a few weeks or months. So the animal shelter often only provides food and housing for a short period of time, although the care for the shelter animals on a per animal basis is much less than the care for a sanctuary animal. Shelters have a much larger population, and that much larger population often requires them to have veterinarians and vet assistants on staff to take care of the many animals' medical needs.
I would just like to point out that someone posted in the Q&A about my last point about contacting your local Red Cross and their shelter person as they're moving towards the cohabitation shelters. And while these shelters pop up after big disasters, they need local partners to train throughout the year. That's a great point, Robert, and I really appreciate you dropping that in the chat.
Okay, some final points. Remember to be creative with fundraising. Consider collaborating with other similar organizations to join in fundraising events. Remember the businesses in your area. They are often willing to help host a third-party event, sponsor an event, or send some of their employees to the shelter for a day of community service. Remember to use volunteers whenever possible to keep salary expenses lower. And we hope that this webinar has given everyone some ideas on different ways to raise funds for the animals, save money on expenses, and utilize volunteers.
So we have just a few moments to take some time for questions. It doesn't look like you've submitted any, but we're happy to address any if y'all would like to drop any in the chat. I do know that, I just attended the AOA conference, and there were a couple different things that was pointed out. I do know, kind of going back to my last point that I made, there are some local shelters that I talked to at that conference that are really working with some of the human shelters to receive additional grant funding that way. And that would allow them to get some additional federal funding that is not typically allowable or offered to animal welfare organizations. And we do plan on having some information available at a later date about that. So one question that did come up is where can you learn more and what other resources are available? And so if you look at our website, you can learn more about how we can help your organization. This is www.yptc.com. You can find information about our specialization on our website. And about the different resources that we offer to our animal welfare organizations. We also have a list of different webinars that we have available for all nonprofits, and then also ones that will be coming up for specific to the animal welfare industry. So although our time together was a bit brief, only 30 minutes, we've covered a lot of ground with just the differences between shelters and sanctuaries, but I would like to address a few key points that we will be addressing in the future. We plan to look at the vet shortage and how to help address this from a financial standpoint, budgeting for emergency preparedness, some additional information about revenue diversification strategies, and specifically kind of going into the points about partnering with your human shelters, along with many more topics. So as I said, be on the lookout for any new YPTC and animal welfare team webinars by looking at our website to see how we could help your organization, whether it's from your day-to-day accounting needs, any special projects, or even grant management support. You can contact us using the information on the slide, which is hello@yptc.com. Or if you want to reach out to the three of us specifically, you can look in our speaker notes or speaker information and get our contact information to contact one of the three of us. We appreciate your time today and taking the time out on this Thanksgiving week. We do wish you a happy holiday.
Thank you.
Thank you.